Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that is going to make you a better developer. I'm talking about scoped services and scoped lifetimes in dependency injection in ASP.NET Core. So, if this sounds interesting to you and you want to become a true scoped service lifetime expert, that's a mouthful, you should definitely grab yourself a cup of coffee, sit back and enjoy the video. Alright, let's kick things off by first learning what scoped services are and why they are so important to master. You can imagine it like going to a buffet, and every time you go to ask for some food, you get an entirely new plate containing the food you ordered. It works exactly the same with scoped services. Their lifetime is equal to the lifetime of one request. So when a user requests some page or some API endpoint, and that requires a certain service that we built, which is defined as a scoped lifetime service, and in order for this to be served to the user, we need to instantiate this service. We know that when defined as scoped lifetime, this service will be reused across this one single request that was created by the user. And then when the user creates another request, a new instance of this service will be created, which makes this lifetime something like a middle ground. It's not transient, so every time you request a service, you get a new instance, but also it's not a singleton, so you have to reuse a single instance that was once created and is going to be reused across entire lifespan of our application, all until we restart it, of course. So, what better way to master the scoped services except to go to our Visual Studio and see how it works in real-life examples. Let us take a look at our example we have here. We have a very simple interface with a single method again, which is now called getRequestID. And we also have a concrete class called RequestIDService, which implements this interface, so it has to implement the method we defined here, which it does. And also we're creating a private read-only field, which is going to be populated inside of the constructor of the RequestID service. So inside of the value of this private field, we will generate a new GUID value and convert it to string. So basically, when we invoke this method, we're just returning the value, the GUID value that was generated while creating a concrete instance of this service. And now we just need to head to our program.cs file and define which lifetime this service is going to be using. We want scoped, as we mentioned, and if you saw the title of the video, it's self-explanatory. So we have a scoped service lifetime, and we want to get RequestID service instance when we request iRequestID service interface. Now we can head to our controller and see how things work in action. So we're doing the same thing as usual. We're injecting a value through our constructor into a private field, which is going to contain a concrete implementation or the instance for the RequestID service. And then we just invoke getRequestID method and pass the result to the view. So when I run this code, let's see what we get. As you can see, we get a GUID, which is exactly what we expected to get. But every time I refresh the page, I'm creating a new request to the server for this concrete page, and that is why I get a different ID every time I refresh the page. But you may wonder, it would be exactly the same if we basically define this service as transient, right? So if I make it transient and run it again, we should get exactly the same results. Let me refresh. And yeah, we do get different results. This is basically because we do not have a right example. But I'm about to extend our example so you see what is going to be the difference. But first, let me show you what is going to happen when we use add singleton lifetime. So now, when we run the application, and when I refresh the page, as you can see, I'm refreshing the page all the time, we keep getting the same ID. That is because a single instance is being reused and the private field is not regenerated over and over again. So now, as promised, let's extend our example. What are we going to introduce is logging service. We have a logging service interface and a concrete implementation, which is just going to print the value of our iRequestID getRequestID method into a console. So we do not do much here. We just create a new instance of iRequestID service, so a new instance, and then we just log the value that we get when invoking getRequestID method. So now we need to register this, but we need to change this back to scoped. And let me introduce this one as well, add scoped as well. And yeah, we need to update our controller. So now we are requesting two dependencies and injecting them in constructor. And then we are going to invoke logging service log method and just provide home controller index action code. So let us test this out and see what we get. As you can see here, I get 5616 ID, and when I open the console, we are logging 5616 also ID home controller index action code. So this indicates that the same exact instance of iRequestID service is being used both in our controller and in our logging service. So this completely implies that we are indeed using same instance across entire request. But now, of course, if I were to refresh the page, we do get a new ID, but when we take a look here, it's again the same ID in our console application. So it makes sense that we are using the same instance across the single request. But when I update the lifetime back to Transient, where we got the same results in the previous example, now we should not get the same results because new instance should be created every single time when we try to inject a new instance of this service. So right now, when we are using Transient lifetime, we should get a new instance every time we request a new instance of iRequestID service. So let me prove that to you. As we can see here on the web page, we have 3B37, but when it comes to console, we get something entirely different, 8961. But when I refresh the page, we get 1B9D, and when I open the console, we get E7EE. So we are getting different IDs, which indicates that we are using different instances of iRequestID service. So right now, I hope you have a much better understanding of the concept of scoped lifetime services than you had before. And great, now that we are completely familiar with the concept and the differences between different lifetimes in examples and in practice, it is time to mention a few real-life examples where you would definitely want to utilize scoped lifetimes for your dependency injection containers. So, the first example is the one we already mentioned. As I said, it is a great practice to use scoped lifetimes for your communication with the database, because you want to have not too many instances of your DB context classes which are used to communicate with the database, but also you want to make sure that they are up to date because different people can be adjusting states and updating the database throughout the time. So you do want to get an updated version, but not every time a new SQL action is getting executed. So that is why I think that scoped lifetime services are perfect for our DB management. Next in line is going to be unit of work pattern. So while using it, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if you're not, do not worry, we will be covering it here on the channel very soon. But the concept is you want to put as many SQL actions into a single transaction so you do not constantly bother your database with smaller calls, but you want to group them together and execute them as a single unit of work. And basically, this goes perfectly with scoped lifetimes. So you want definitely to use them in these scenarios. I also provided a simple example you can see right here. And as you can see there, we have a simple interface with a single method, and also we have a concrete implementation of it where we implement that method, which is going to commit all the changes to the database when invoked. Then we have logging. As you saw in our example already, scoped lifetime is perfect for logging your requests, because usually you do want to know which is request you are working with and looking at. And that is why in the example provided, you will see that we are utilizing HTTP context information to get the request ID and then log information about it. So that way, when we go through our logs, we will know exactly which request created a problem, or maybe which request did something we're interested in. So basically, that is another point when you definitely want to consider scoped lifetimes. And finally, I wanted to share with you another example in reality where you do want to use scoped lifetimes, and I'm talking about request scoped configurations. So as you know, we do use configurations to read certain information from the configuration files, and that information might be updated at some point, and you do not want your users to use stale configurations, which would be the case if we were registering them with singleton lifetime, but we want to make them optimized so they are not instantiated every time we want to get a configuration, and we do not want to use a single stale state from our configuration, which would be the singleton case as well, which is why scoped lifetime fits perfectly into this frame. As you can see in the example, it's very simple. We're just reading from iConfiguration, which reads from the upsettings JSON file by default, or you can set it to whatever you like explicitly, but by default it's upsettings, and you are providing configuration values to your user. And there you have it, folks. Those are the examples when you do want to use scoped lifetimes. Of course, there are exceptions, but those are some of the most commonly used situations where you do want to use them. So right now, I feel like you've heard enough and that you've learned quite a few new things about scoped lifetimes when it comes to dependency injection, and that's why I think it's a great moment to end this video, and in the next one we'll continue learning and mastering new stuff. Again, dependency injection related. If you're interested in that, I would like to kindly invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications, or if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video and I'll try to address them all. Until the next video, thank you for watching and have an amazing day. Happy coding!